NCIS Origins Season 2 Episode 15 breaks hearts with Lala and Manny's doomed love story. Season 2, Episode 15 of NCIS. Origins arrives with a kind of emotional weight that lingers long after the credits roll. Titled in fan circles as one of the series' most devastating chapters, the episode doesn't just advance the overarching investigation, it quietly dismantles a love story that viewers were just beginning to believe in. At the center of it all are Lala and Manny, two agents whose connection has always felt like it was balancing on borrowed time. From the opening minutes, the episode makes one thing clear: something is off. The usual rhythm of the team feels disrupted. Conversations are shorter, glances last longer, and the unspoken tension between duty and desire hangs over every scene involving Lala and Manny. What once felt like subtle romantic buildup now feels like the calm before an emotional storm. A love built in the shadows. Lala and Manny's relationship has never been simple. It was never written as a straightforward romance, but rather something that grew in fragments, late night debriefs, shared silences after difficult cases, and the kind of trust that only forms when two people have seen each other at their most vulnerable. Episode 15 leans heavily into those memories. Through carefully placed flashbacks and quiet character moments, we see how their bond developed not in grand declarations, but in almost invisible shifts: a hand held a second too long, a joke that lands softer than intended, a hesitation before walking away. What makes their story so compelling is that neither of them ever fully admits what is happening. Lala is disciplined, emotionally guarded, and deeply aware of the consequences of attachment in their line of work. Manny, on the other hand, is more open but equally cautious, as if he instinctively knows that anything real between them would come at a cost. That cost begins to reveal itself in this episode. The case that changes everything. The central investigation of episode 15 revolves around a seemingly routine NCIS case that quickly spirals into something far more personal for the team. Without diving too deep into procedural specifics, what matters is how closely the case mirrors Lala and Manny's emotional situation. The victim's story, someone torn between loyalty and love, forced into impossible choices, becomes a thematic reflection of what both agents are silently experiencing. The writing deliberately draws parallels, making it clear that the case is not just something they are solving, but something that is quietly exposing them. As the investigation progresses, Lala begins to pull away. Not dramatically, but in small, almost imperceptible ways. She stops finishing Manny's sentences. She avoids standing too close in group discussions. She focuses more on protocol than on instinct. Manny notices. Of course he does. But like many emotional truths in NCIS Origins, nothing is said out loud. The breaking point, the emotional core of the episode, arrives in a scene that is understated rather than explosive. There is no dramatic confession, no shouting match, no cinematic breakup moment. Instead, there is a conversation that feels painfully real in its restraint. Manny finally confronts Lala, not with accusations, but with quiet honesty. He asks her if what they have means anything outside of work. The question hangs in the air longer than any answer she could give. Lala's silence says everything. It isn't that she doesn't care. That much is obvious. It's that caring in her world has consequences she is no longer willing to risk. Her past experiences, hinted at earlier in the season, have shaped her into someone who associates emotional attachment with inevitable loss. When she finally speaks, her words are careful, almost rehearsed. She doesn't deny her feelings. Instead, she questions their survival. "We don't get to keep things like this," she says in essence, not as a rejection of Manny, but as a rejection of the idea that love can exist safely within their lives. Manny's quiet devastation, what makes Manny's arc in this episode so heartbreaking, is how restrained it is. He doesn't plead. He doesn't argue. Instead, he accepts what is being taken from him in real time. There is a moment later in the episode where he is alone, looking at evidence photos from the case, and the weight of everything finally settles on him. It's not just about the investigation anymore. It's about realization, the understanding that sometimes timing, circumstance, and duty can dismantle something before it ever fully becomes real. The performance in this sequence is deliberately understated. There are no dramatic tears, just a quiet stillness that speaks louder than any dialogue could. The team feels it too. One of the subtle strengths of NCIS, Origins has always been its ability to reflect personal dynamics within the larger team structure. Episode 15 continues that tradition. While no one explicitly comments on Lala and Manny's situation, the rest of the team senses the shift. Small details reinforce this. Missed eye contact during briefing, slightly delayed responses in conversation, and an emotional distance that wasn't there before. It's the kind of storytelling that trusts the audience to understand what is not being said. A doomed love story, told gently. What sets this episode apart from typical breakup storylines is its refusal to villainize either character. There is no betrayal, no misunderstanding, no external interference forcing them apart. Instead, the tragedy is structural. Their love is not destroyed, it is simply incompatible with the life they are required to live. That distinction matters. It transforms the story from a romantic loss into something more existential. Lala and Manny are not losing each other because they failed. They are losing each other because the world they inhabit does not make space for what they are becoming. The final scene, silence instead of goodbye. The episode closes not with resolution, but with absence. Lala and Manny do not officially say goodbye in a traditional sense. There is no final embrace, no last declaration of love. Instead, there is distance. Physical, emotional, and intentional. They part ways after a case wrap, each returning to their responsibilities as if nothing has changed except everything has. The camera lingers just long enough to make the silence feel heavy. And then it ends. Why it hurts so much. Episode 15 works because it refuses to overplay its hand. It understands that the most painful endings are often the quiet ones, the relationships that don't explode, but dissolve. The love stories that don't fail loudly, but fade under pressure. Lala and Manny's story is not framed as a tragedy of incompatibility between two people, but rather incompatibility between love and duty, between connection and survival, between what they feel and what they can afford to feel. And that is what makes it linger. Final thoughts. NCIS. Origins Season 2 Episode 15 doesn't just break hearts, it does so with precision. It takes a relationship that was built on subtlety and ends it with the same restraint, making the absence feel even louder than presence ever did. Lala and Manny's doomed love story may not have lasted, but it leaves behind something far more powerful than resolution. The reminder that not every love story is meant to survive, and not every connection needs closure to be unforgettable. NCIS Origins Season 2 Episode 16, The Aftermath of Lala and Manny's Break. If episode 15 was about the heartbreak of letting go, episode 16 is about what comes after, the uncomfortable silence that follows when two people who matter deeply to each other suddenly start acting like they don't. The episode opens without ceremony. There's no recap, no emotional rewind. Just the NCIS team moving forward as if nothing has changed. But everything has. A team that can't pretend anymore. From the first briefing, it's obvious the dynamic between Lala and Manny has shifted into something colder and more controlled. They still work together. They still exchange necessary information. But the ease they once had is gone. It's not hostility, it's distance. Even the team picks up on it. Conversations feel slightly delayed, like everyone is choosing their words more carefully. The unspoken question lingers in every interaction. What happened between them? But no one asks it out loud. Lala's controlled silence. Lala becomes the focus of emotional restraint in this episode. Where she once showed small moments of warmth, she now locks everything behind professionalism. She arrives early, leaves late, and keeps her focus entirely on the case file. But there are cracks. A moment stands out when she pauses at Manny's desk longer than necessary, noticing something small, a file he organized, a note he left, or a habit that used to feel familiar. She doesn't say anything. She simply moves on. That silence says more than dialogue ever could. Later, in a quieter moment alone, Lala allows herself a brief breakdown, not dramatic, not loud, but contained. It's the kind of emotion she doesn't want anyone to witness, especially not Manny. Manny's distraction becomes obvious. Manny, on the other hand, handles things differently. Where Lala withdraws, he distracts himself. He throws himself into the case, volunteering for extra work, reviewing evidence twice, staying late even when it isn't necessary. But it's clear he's not fully present. During an interrogation scene, he loses his edge for a split second, a hesitation in his tone that almost lets a suspect slip through their grasp. It's subtle, but enough for the audience to understand. His emotional state is affecting his judgment. The team notices it too, even if they don't comment directly. A case that mirrors their emotional fallout. The central investigation in episode 16 involves a suspect whose relationships have been fractured by secrecy and emotional suppression. Once again, the case mirrors the personal arc of Lala and Manny. The more they dig, the more the theme becomes clear. Unresolved emotions don't disappear, they distort everything around them. The investigation forces them to work side by side more closely than either of them wants. Every shared glance feels heavier than before. Every technical exchange is efficient but emotionally strict. The almost conversation. Midway through the episode, there is a moment fans will not forget, a near conversation that never fully happens. Lala and Manny find themselves alone in the evidence room. It's quiet, cramped, unavoidable. For a brief moment, it feels like something might be said. Something real. Manny starts to speak. Stops. Lala looks at him. Waits. But instead of addressing what happened between them, they revert to work. Evidence. Timeline. Procedure. And just like that, the moment passes. Nothing is resolved. Everything remains unsaid. The emotional cost of professionalism. Episode 16 makes one thing painfully clear. Both Lala and Manny are trying to survive the aftermath by pretending they're unaffected. But the effort itself is what makes it worse. Their professionalism becomes a shield, but also a prison. Every interaction is filtered through caution. Every sentence is measured. Every reaction is controlled. And yet, the emotional residue of what they shared refuses to disappear. There's a quiet irony in how effectively they can solve crimes together while failing to process what's happening between them. A turning point in the final act. In the final act, the case reaches its conclusion, but the emotional story does not. The suspect is apprehended. Justice is served. The team celebrates in the most muted way possible. But Lala and Manny don't join in the same way they used to. They stand on opposite sides of the room, close enough to see each other, far enough to avoid each other. At one point, Manny looks at Lala, really looks at her, but she doesn't meet his eyes. Not because she doesn't feel it, but because she does. And that is the difference now. No closure, only continuation. The episode ends without reconciliation. There is no dramatic fix, no emotional breakthrough, no return to what they once were. Instead, there is acceptance of distance. Lala continues forward, disciplined and composed. Manny follows his work, slightly more hollow but still functional. The team moves on, but the audience is left with a clear understanding. This isn't a breakup that heals quickly. It's one that lingers beneath everything they do. What episode 16 really says, while episode 15 was about heartbreak, episode 16 is about emotional aftermath, the quiet, uncomfortable space where two people still care but can no longer act on it. It explores a difficult truth often avoided in storytelling. Not all endings are clean. Some relationships don't end with closure, but with ongoing presence and absence. Lala and Manny are still in each other's orbit, still partners in work, still connected through history. But something fundamental has shifted, and it cannot be reversed easily. Final thought. NCIS Origins Season 2 Episode 16 doesn't try to repair the damage left by Episode 15. Instead, it sits inside it. It shows what happens when love doesn't explode or fade, but simply becomes something two people carry silently while continuing their lives. And in that silence, the story becomes even more heartbreaking than before. NCIS Origins Season 2 Episode 17 When silence starts to crack, episode 17 picks up in the uneasy space episode 16 left behind, where everything looks normal on the surface, but nothing feels stable underneath. Lala and Manny are still functioning as partners, still solving cases, still showing up, but the emotional distance between them has stopped being quiet. Now, it's starting to leak into everything. And this time, it's not just them who feel it. A case that forces pressure back into the room. The episode opens with a high stakes NCIS investigation involving a missing naval intelligence courier and a compromised data transfer. It's the kind of case that demands absolute coordination, split second trust, and unspoken communication, which is exactly what Lala and Manny no longer have in full supply. At first, they compensate well. Training and professionalism carry them through early stages of the investigation. They still anticipate each other's moves, but not as smoothly as before. There have second delays where instinct used to be immediate. Those half seconds matter. The first visible break in coordination, the turning point, comes during a field operation. Lala moves in on a suspect angle based on partial intel. Manny, operating on a different interpretation of the same data, tries to redirect her mid-action. They hesitate. They disagree. And for the first time in a long time, they are not aligned. It's small in execution, but heavy in consequence. The suspect slips away long enough to complicate the case further. Neither of them says it out loud in the moment, but both understand the truth. This isn't just a tactical issue. It's personal interference bleeding into professional space. The team can no longer ignore it. By mid-episode, the rest of the NCIS team begins to clearly notice the fracture. Instructions get repeated more often. Decisions are double-checked unnecessarily. Conversations between Lala and Manny feel overly formal, almost rehearsed. One team member quietly remarks that they used to move like one unit. Now they don't. No one pushes too hard for answers, but the tension is no longer invisible. Lala's breaking point isn't loud. Lala reaches her limit in a way that is almost unnoticeable at first. During a briefing, Manny challenges one of her assumptions, not aggressively, but firmly. It's correct from a procedural standpoint, objectively valid. But emotionally, it lands differently than it would have before. Lala doesn't respond immediately. That pause is the moment. Later, she steps out alone, not angry, not emotional in an obvious way, but shaken. For someone who has built her identity on control, the realization that her personal life is now affecting her judgment is deeply unsettling. She doesn't blame Manny. She blames what they became. Manny's frustration turns inward. Manny, meanwhile, begins to internalize the strain differently. He doesn't express anger toward Lala. Instead, he becomes more precise, more rigid, more focused on eliminating mistakes. But that shift creates its own problem. Where he used to rely on instinct and partnership, he now overcorrects. He second guesses himself. He tries to compensate for the emotional gap by tightening control over every variable in the case. It works until it doesn't. A key decision later in the episode, made without consulting Lala, nearly jeopardizes the operation. Not because it was reckless, but because it wasn't shared. Trust, once automatic between them, now has to be rebuilt in real time, and neither of them knows how to start. A moment they almost fix everything. The emotional centerpiece of episode 17 comes late in the hour, in a quiet, off-duty setting after the case stabilizes. Lala and Manny are left alone in the aftermath of a successful but messy operation. There is no audience, no team, no immediate pressure. Just the two of them. For a moment, it feels like they might finally address everything properly. The silence between them is no longer comfortable, but it is honest. Manny begins again. Not with accusation, but with truth. This isn't working like it used to. Lala doesn't deny it. Instead, she responds with something more painful. It can't. The realization neither wanted this is the moment episode 17 builds toward. Not reconciliation, not conflict, but acceptance of incompatibility within their current reality. They both understand what's being said without needing further explanation. It's not that they stopped caring. It's that caring has consequences neither can afford while doing this job at this level. And that truth is heavier than any breakup argument could ever be. A decision without words. There is no formal resolution, no decision to fix things, no attempt to return to what they were. Instead, they fall into a new rhythm, not as partners who are healing, but as professionals adapting to limitation. They agree, without explicitly stating it, to separate emotional processing from operational necessity. But separation doesn't erase memory. The final scene, distance becomes structure. The episode closes with Lala and Manny walking away from each other after debrief. Not dramatically, not angrily, just separately. The camera lingers on the space between them longer than on either of them individually. That space has become the new defining feature of their relationship. Not love, not loss, distance. What episode 17 really changes: if episode 15 was heartbreak and episode 16 was aftermath, episode 17 is adjustment. It shows that emotional fractures in high pressure environments don't heal quickly, they evolve into structure. Lala and Manny are no longer trying to undo what happened. They are trying to function inside it. And that might be the most painful stage of all, because there is no collapse to mourn anymore, only continuation without resolution. Final thought: NCIS. Origins Season 2 Episode 17 doesn't rebuild the romance between Lala and Manny. It does something more realistic and more painful. It shows what happens when two people realize love cannot be removed from their history, but also cannot be safely carried forward in the same form. So they keep going, together in duty, apart in everything else. NCIS. Origins Season 2 Episode 18, Lines You Don't Cross, and the return of what they tried to bury. Episode 18 opens differently from the recent emotional arc of Lala and Manny. There's no immediate focus on their distance, no lingering silence between them in the first scene. Instead, the episode tries, almost intentionally, to distract itself with a high-intensity NCIS case involving a stolen classified weapons blueprint linked to a naval contractor breach. But the truth is simple: no one is really distracted anymore, least of all Lala and Manny, because whatever they buried in episode 17 starts coming back up. A case that demands perfect trust. The investigation escalates quickly. A compromised intelligence chain forces the team into multiple synchronized operations across separate locations. Timing becomes everything. Miscommunication could mean losing the suspect, or worse, escalating a national security incident. Naturally, this puts Lala and Manny in the exact position they've been avoiding: forced coordination under pressure. At first, they try to operate like professionals who have already moved on. It almost works. But almost is where things start breaking again. Old instincts don't disappear easily. There's a moment early in the episode where Lala and Manny instinctively react to a developing situation in near perfect sync. No discussion, no planning, just movement. For a brief second, it feels like nothing changed between them. Then reality returns. They both notice it at the same time, and neither of them comments on it. That silence matters more than the action itself, because it confirms something neither wants to admit: their connection didn't disappear. It was only restrained. The pressure builds beneath the surface as the case deepens. Small cracks begin to reappear in their professional rhythm. Lala starts anticipating Manny's decisions before he fully explains them. Manny begins adjusting his strategy based on what he thinks Lala would do, not necessarily what she says. Both of them hesitate, but only for milliseconds. The problem is no longer that they don't understand each other. It's that they still do. And that understanding is dangerous in its own way. The moment everything nearly falls apart mid-episode, a critical field operation goes wrong, this time not because of disagreement, but because of overcorrection. Manny hesitates before executing a coordinated move, second-guessing whether Lala would approve under current conditions. That hesitation creates a delay. Lala notices the delay immediately. She adjusts instinctively, compensates, and stabilizes the situation, but not before the window of opportunity narrows dangerously. Afterward, there's no shouting, no blame, just realization. This isn't conflict anymore. It's interference caused by emotional memory. The conversation they can no longer avoid later, away from the team. The episode finally gives them what episode 17 delayed: an honest conversation. It doesn't happen dramatically. There is no confrontation set up. It simply happens because it has to. Manny speaks first. Not about feelings, not about the past, about performance. We're getting in our own way. Lala doesn't argue, but she also doesn't soften the truth. It's not getting better. This time, neither of them pretends otherwise. The real conflict is not between them, it's within them. What episode 18 reveals clearly is that Lala and Manny are no longer fighting each other. They're fighting the remnants of what they were. Every instinct they developed together still exists. Every emotional connection still influences reaction time, decision making, trust patterns. They are trying to operate as strangers while still functioning like a team built on deep familiarity. And that contradiction is unsustainable. A shift in understanding there is a subtle but important shift in this episode. Neither Lala nor Manny is angry anymore. The tone changes from frustration to resignation. Lala begins to understand that emotional suppression didn't erase attachment, it just made it harder to control under pressure. Manny begins to understand that trying to compensate for emotional distance only makes operational trust more fragile, not stronger. They are no longer trying to fix the relationship. They are trying to stabilize its aftermath. The case resolution mirrors their state. The NCIS case is eventually resolved through a coordinated effort, but notably, not through perfect synchronization. Instead, it succeeds because they deliberately separate roles. Lala takes primary tactical control. Manny operates in execution support, stepping back from instinctive interference. It works, but it feels different. Less like harmony, more like compartmentalization. Efficient, functional, controlled, but emotionally empty. The final scene, a new kind of distance. The episode closes with Lala and Manny standing in the aftermath of the case resolution. The team is relieved. The tension is gone from the mission, but not from them. They exchange a look, not long enough to be meaningful in words, but long enough to acknowledge everything unsaid between them. No apology is offered. None is expected anymore. And then they separate, not sharply, not emotionally, but deliberately, like professionals choosing structure over instinct. What episode 18 really confirms, this episode quietly confirms something the previous ones were building toward. Lala and Manny are not drifting apart anymore. They are learning how to exist in the same space without reverting to what they were. Not healing, not breaking further, just adapting. And adaptation, in their world, is often indistinguishable from loss. Final thought. NCIS Origins Season 2 Episode 18 doesn't reopen the romance, and it doesn't finalize the breakup. Instead, it settles into something more complicated and far more realistic, a working relationship permanently shaped by emotional history that cannot be removed, only managed. Lala and Manny don't stop caring. They just stop letting it lead. And in their line of work, that might be the only way forward that doesn't end in collapse.